pro streamer tip. You want all your mess out of frame. Like if you saw the rest of my room.
Yeah, give me like 2 seconds. Hold on.
Oh, sure.
Do you actually care this much?
No.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself and Paul Hoppe are going to be talking about celebrity culture. We're going to be talking about why do people get so invested in trials of celebrities? How do people feel about threatening violence against people who make content you don't like? And we're also going to have a moment to talk about Paul listening to some old episodes and asking some questions. All that and more after a commercial break that I think Kathleen Kennedy might have control over because people think she controls everything.
Oh, no. Welcome back to Poker and Podcasts.
Slow down. Slow your roll there. We are going to be talking a lot about Poker and Podcasts, but this is not Poker and Podcasts. This is the Superhero Ethics podcast. I am Matthew Fox, they, them pronouns.
I am Paul Hoppe. I also prefer they, them pronouns. I'm just going to say that. There
you go. That's fine. That's fine.
It's a very mild preference.
I mean, it's going to be the two of us talking to each other, so I don't think we're going to use too many pronouns, but, good to let people know who we are.
True.
That clap, amazing. Cool. Yeah. Glad people are enjoying it. Don't understand. Moving on. You heard Paul talk about something called Poker and Podcasts. This is an awesome thing Paul has been doing recently, and it's going to be a big part of what we talk about today, where Paul has been going back in time, listening to old episodes of this podcast, the original episodes of this podcast, back before we had discovered crazy technology like audio editing, and listening to what we talked about then, while also playing some poker and making some commentary because he knows that it's perfectly safe for him to critique everything I do because I'm not there to defend myself. Well, now I am. So we are going to talk about a lot about that. Definitely those things are awesome and worth checking out if you go to youtube.com. Let me let Paul say that. Paul, how can people find Poker and Podcasts?
Sure. The easiest and only place to find it is at YouTube. My username there is ZenMadman. And if you are watching this video, hi YouTube. Although if you're watching this video live, hello Twitch. It's like youtube.com/user/ZenMadman. And eventually we'll get rid of that /user once we get like 100 subs. Adding, subscribing is super helpful, whether you watch the videos or not, and you can have the notification bell turned on or off. But yeah, it's basically just me sitting there playing a couple tables of poker, listening to old podcasts, and pausing it to say something that then I unpause it and hear my past self saying the exact same thing some of the time.
It's kind of uncanny how often that happens.
And then sometimes the opposite. I'm like, what was I thinking?
Basically, we've decided that audio is not enough. We're trying to conquer the visual airwaves as well with, 30 subscribers at a time. But yeah, so on YouTube, on Twitch, on my own TikTok channel, The Ethical Panda, we're starting to put clips of that stuff. If you're just a podcast subscriber, that's fantastic and wonderful. And we're very welcome to have you here. But also check out YouTube, check out Twitch. Even if you're never going to watch again, you can drop a subscribe in either one of those or subscribe to The Ethical Panda on TikTok. But the YouTube is by far the most important. It's going to really help us to give you all more content of the kind that I know you love. So we're going to talk about some of those things that have come up from some of that, including some ideas about fear and poker and how movies change when their sequels have come out, as well as someone daring to critique the fantastic naming conceits that I use for episodes. But I want to start, Paul, by asking you a question as we get into the celebrity culture idea that we're going to get into, because, celebrity and fandom are things that come up a lot. It's a question I am being asked fairly often. I don't really have much of an answer to, but I'm curious you do. What do you think of the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial?
Is this a thing? That's okay. I know it's a thing. So I was thinking about this episode and thinking, is there a way to not have this episode have the explicit tag? Because I can't figure out why the fuck I should care about most of these things. And you can edit that if you want. But honestly, it just like, I remember the OJ trial when I think we were both in high school at the time. I definitely was. And I remember like the verdict being announced while I was at school. And I was just like, like I don't understand why this is so important to so many people, and I understand there's a lot of societal issues that are underpinning some of these things, and people see parallels to their own lives or to things going on in the rest of the world. But like overall, it's just like these are things that are a very big deal to these people, but like that it has nothing to do with any of the reasons that I've heard of these people, right?
Right.
Like if you're an actor, I don't want to know anything about you. Really, literally, right? Like your job is almost to not exist in a way. But our the world we live in has twisted it so much that like the stories around the actors end up being as big as the stories that the actors are, portraying on screen. And to me, it just it's just so backwards from, like my understanding of like what an actor does. And I find it very annoying.
Yeah. I can understand that. I think I am at times a little more interested than you are, primarily for kind of the reason you talked about the kind of when it has social implications or when there's kind of like larger, it's either a microcosm of larger issues or things like that. But as well as because I do think, and this is an area where we may disagree somewhat, or we may have some agreement, the more I know about some creators may affect how interested or not interested I am in consuming their products or giving them money or things like that. But let's start with that, because as I see it, I think there's kind of three core reasons why people often pay attention to these celebrity trials or celebrity gossip or whatever it is. And the first is kind of just a kind of voyeuristic, like, and that sounds like a very pejorative term, and I am being kind of pejorative about it, but I'm trying to maybe come up with a bit more neutral way of describing it. We kind of like we see these people all the time. We know about these people. We want to know more about them, including, I think that for many folks, there is a kind of thrill of learning something that you're not supposed to know. That the person who, and we'll talk about that, the kind of, I'm going to call it voyeurism, but if someone has a better non-pejorative term, please let me know. The second is the kind of questions about how do knowing these things or not knowing these things have any effect, if any, on where we decide to spend our dollars, what we decide to focus on, things like that. And then the third being like when the issues that celebrities are going through are kind of microcosms of things that a lot of people go through. So let's start with that first one. Why do you think it is that for so many people, like, we're there? My understanding is that, like, I think it's Court TV. I don't know, but whatever it is that's live broadcasting the trial every day for months now is getting huge ratings. Like, if people are watching it all the time, and I'm getting tweets and texts about it and Facebooks about it all the time. Why do you think it is so interesting to folks?
I mean, I kind of feel like I'm the wrong person to ask that question. But I'm also the only person here, so I'll take a shot.
Yeah.
I mean, just because like I don't find it interesting or compelling, but I think there's something, people in general like drama, right? People watch dramas and comedy and whatnot. And I think there's something about something being real, like real life, that some people or that people can find extra compelling, right? That it's like, oh, well, there's some stakes here that I know are real. There's no suspension of disbelief, right? And I think that's part of the reason that reality TV appeals to people, even though there you probably need some suspension of disbelief because it's often not entirely real. In that case, here I imagine it is, right? But yeah, I mean, I see Courtney in the chat is saying, I love the psychology of it. It's like looking behind closed doors. And yeah, I mean, I think getting an insight into something that you maybe don't usually get to see. And it doesn't even necessarily matter that these are famous people, right? Because, I mean, you can have shows like this. I mean, they have Court TV, right? That's not all famous people. And that can be interesting to people. And there's an extent to which I feel like the more interesting it is when the people aren't famous, kind of the less issue I take with it being, popular or whatever because they're famous, right? Because then it's like that's less of the cause. But I do think there's like a voyeuristic element to it, and a like, but it's I have like I'm of two minds on it, right? Because like on the one hand, people are into what they're into, and it's like, I never want to criticize someone for enjoying something, right? It's like, I mean, like whatever it is, it's like if that's a thing you enjoy, that's not necessarily, that's not like something wrong with you, and that's not like,
Right.
I don't think that is bad. But the how you act on it, I think then can be, you know,
Right.
and I might have some contempt for the thing while trying and pretty much succeeding, not having contempt for, you know, the people having the desire to watch the thing. If that like makes any sense, you know.
No, I think it does. And I think I'm kind of halfway in the middle there, because I think you talk about how you just don't understand the desire. You don't feel the desire. I think I definitely do. I definitely feel it's a kind of a like, it's a baser thing that I'm like, I'm not going to judge someone else for doing it. I don't want to indulge in that part, in that thing.
Right.
But I think, yeah, as Courtney said, the whole thing of like wanting to look behind closed doors, I think there is a fascination, particularly in celebrity culture today,
Yeah.
because and this has probably always been true to some extent, but like today, a lot of the celebrities we know best have very well sculpted public personas, you know, and like you and I both talk a lot about the show we both enjoy, Entourage, which granted is sort of a satire of Hollywood, but one of the things it gets into is this idea of like, oh, you know, this actress or this character, like, you know, has a very specific public image, you know, and like I think that there's something appealing about wanting when you know someone is kind of like, you know, like Taylor Swift, I think has been very clear that she does this a lot. You know, that the kind of like there is Taylor Swift is a character who exists in social media and exists on the public, and the claim is that that's the real Taylor Swift. And in their songs, a lot of it comes out as well. And I think I don't want to focus just on women. I think certainly a lot of the guys, Harry Styles, I think is another great example of this. The fact that the two of them had a very public relationship that, from a lot of people's perspective, may have been entirely publicist created is kind of one of the examples of what I'm getting at here.
Right.
You know, and so I think that sometimes there's that idea of like, wait, I want to look at like, okay, not just the like the image that they're telling me that they are, but I want to see the real image of them, you know? And I think the voyeurism is definitely a thing. And I say that both metaphorically, but also quite literally, you know, because I think that that's where, like, to me, one of the places where this gets most disgusting, I think, and here where I will become quite judgmental of it, is when it becomes all about the sort of the obsession with the like the leaked selfies, you know, like this actress, or often it's actresses, but not all, you know, who only will strip down to like a bikini on film, but now we see like them naked from their phone pic. I mean, that's just it's I think it's the same urge, just taken to a much more invasive level, and one where they clearly have much less control over it. But I think there's a similar thing happening there, especially with things like the trials, you know, and I think that's a part of it. I also think there's an element of Schadenfreude of, you know, of like, and again, here, this is one where like, I don't think it's bad necessarily to want to indulge in this. And I can think it's very understandable, especially in a world of ours where like income inequality is getting worse and worse and worse, you know? Literally just 5 minutes before I started this, I saw a news story that Nancy Pelosi's husband was arrested, I think 2 nights ago now, for drunk driving. And, you know, I have no idea who the person is. I've never met Nancy Pelosi, let alone her husband. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice person. I don't want people drunk driving. I hope he faces justice. But as someone who's often frustrated by her politics and the kind of sometimes sense I have of being kind of like above it all, there was a little part of me that's like, yeah, I kind of like seeing you all being dragged into the mud a little bit. I don't think it's a great part of my personality by any means. That's why I try not to indulge it. But I can understand where the desire there comes from.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you. I definitely understand sort of the Schadenfreude of it. Like for me, I'm not interested in the cultivated public image, and so the like whatever secret real life there is behind that is just like equally like okay. Like if we're friends, cool, but like otherwise, like, you know, you do you, just like, you know, your music might be great, but like I don't, you know, I really want to know you that much as a person necessarily. You know, I have friends, like, you know, there's people who I know personally and interact with individually, you know, and that's not to say that I haven't found out some particular actor or other, you know, other person and like, oh, well, that's kind of awesome, you know, like, and, you know, still like, you still don't know them, you know, I mean, it's like, even when it comes to your own friends, like sometimes you'll find out something and be like, oh, that's surprising, you know, and whether it's something good or bad or, or that you think is good or bad or whatever. But like, yeah, I feel a little differently between like politicians and artists, using the term like inclusively of like anybody who makes something, basically, right? Where I think there's great power in art, but it's not direct power, really, right? Like you're influencing people's minds and people's opinions and emotions, but like you're not controlling where the people with guns go.
Yeah.
And I mean, I believe Nancy Pelosi's husband was wealthy before her whole career, and
I think it's the case. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it would be nice to see like if justice for whatever it is like applied equally. I have some doubt, that often when it's more of a sort of like a scapegoating kind of, or like a totem kind of like, oh, we're gonna see, look, we're doing justice.
Yeah. I feel like her husband will either get the minimum or the maximum punishment.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
It's hard to imagine because like he is 82 and like I could see a sort of like, yeah, he shouldn't probably be driving sober or drunk. I mean, I don't want to be ageist.
Yeah,
like,
it's very ageist, but
there's a lot of ways that could looked at. But yeah, also one of the quick thing, Courtney also points out that John Mayer also is another one of those who has a very sort of constructed personality.
And I think we should start a Judge Judy or Perry versus Perry Mason poll. But we don't have any mods in the chat, so I don't know what. I'll just ask you, which would you watch all day?
I mean, I think Perry Mason is the one who's fictional, and Judge Judy is real. Although that's kind of a good point I wanted to make. And yeah, well, yeah, exactly, because I talk about the public personas there. I kind of feel like celebrity is a great example of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is, I mean, there's a number of different scientific applications to it or ideas to it, but one of it is that the act of observing something changes the thing,
right?
And like Jerry Springer, I think, is the best example of this, where you had people who were intentionally trying to do kind of fairly outrageous things so that they could go on Jerry Springer and talk about it, you know, and like, so it becomes this idea of like the whole concept of, well, we'll get to see the real you by pointing the camera. Once you point the camera, it's no longer
right.
Or is it, or just like the whole idea of like the real you, if you live your life on camera most of the time, then that is the real you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's not the real you. It's not the you without the camera pointed at you.
Right.
Is what it is. It's like you are a little different then.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's another part of it. I think here you're right. I think this should more be applied to politicians, but especially to anybody who is sort of making public commentary about stuff. I do think hypocrisy is something that is important to folks. And so I think that's where things like, and we'll get into Me Too and stuff like that, and how that's kind of the social issue that's important because it's something so many people face. But I think especially there, when you have someone who has a public persona of being, the person who's like constantly talking about, how veganism, I'll ask you, Liz, like, I'm going to guess that if you've got like when celebrities are constantly talking about like how veganism is the way and the best thing, and then like private photos show up of them eating meat, like, is that the kind of thing that bothers you as a vegan?
Actually, I mean, like a little, but it bothers me more how much it seems to bother people who like don't really make any effort to not, torture and murder animals constantly. So that's one of those things where, yeah, it's a little bit like, and I have vegan friends who are like, get like really mad, cause like, and it's not so much like, oh, you're being hypocritical. It's more like, you're making me look bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of more like you're kind of undermining, if you want to call it a movement or whatever, but like honestly, the extent to which people want to jump on that actually bothers me much more. And I think, honestly, I think a lot of times, sometimes jumping on certain types of hypocrisy sometimes is a little bit of like kind of not answering for one's own decisions in a way.
Yeah, it's a kind of like, look, these people think they're high and mighty, so I don't have to try because they don't really mean it either.
Right.
Like I want to get to this more when we do that third category of kind of the social aspect, the commentary. But like, for example, I know, just to kind of put it in the very basic summary, like the idea that through the Amber Heard trial, domestic violence towards masculine people is getting more attention, I think is great.
Right.
But then when I look at a lot of people going, see, Amber lied, thus all women lie, I'm sort of like, well, hey, but slow down here, down here, you know? And that. I think that's a lot of a kind of a similar thing. But so I'll take that question about veganism though a little further to get into that second question, which is one I think I care a lot more about, but my sense is that at least every now and then can come up for you, which is how much does, when we know things about celebrities, does that change our interest in watching things or paying money for things or stuff like that? So, and I'll start for you with a more positive, like, and unfortunately there aren't many good examples of this, but taking kind of hypothetical, you know, if you hear about a movie that's like written and directed by someone who's outwardly vegan and very open about being vegan, and that like that theme is going to be an important part of the movie, or even if it's not, but just how much would that affect your sort of like, oh, you know what, I want to support this creator because they care about values I care about, and I want to support them in that.
Is that I mean, I don't think it would change what I did, but it might make me feel a little happier about it, you know, like, I mean, I've stopped watching things when they do things that I find grotesque, you know, but that's like, it's weird because like, I think Hollywood is probably like disproportionately like vegan claiming, you know, where like, if you like look at and or like vegetarian, right? But like if you look at the population of the United States and then you compare that, you know, to the population of Hollywood, basically, and it's like, yeah, there's going to be a higher percentage of, you know, vegans and vegetarians in Hollywood, which makes it more confounding that like we get such shit representation, you know? And so for me, it would be less about like the people involved, because already like in pretty much most things, I feel like everything is like it's pretty much always a mix of like, you're gonna have probably some vegetarians or vegans like on a given production and some not, right? And like I feel like, did I hear about somewhere they were like, yeah, we're just gonna only have like vegan craft service tables or whatever. Like I would appreciate that. I'd be like, yeah, do that, good, you know, like the New York mayor has like meatless Mondays and like does a lot of other stuff I think is pretty bad, you know, like former cop wants to do more copping, but like, you know, I support that. I'm like, yeah, make the kids eat vegetables, whatever, good. But like, in terms of like, it's hard to like really come up with scenarios where I'm like, oh yeah, I think, you know, there's going to be some, like, really, it would just be like if there's going to be representation that I thought was really good. Right. You know, like we're going to do a story about a vegan diner and everyone on the crew is going to be vegan. Like, okay, yeah, I'll watch that. Watch that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And on the flip side, you said like grotesque. So, because I know that oftentimes I think my sense is that your bar is is a lot lower than a lot of other people's, or maybe a lot higher. But there are still times where like, you know, a writer or a director or an actor does things that for you are so far beyond the pale that you lose interest in seeing them, or you don't want to give money towards them. Is that an accurate statement?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like I was watching some film and they literally just like kill an actual goat in the movie,
right?
And I was like, I'm not watching the rest of this. I had borrowed it from the library, so it's not like anybody got any money. But I'd be like, yeah, I'm not, you know. But yeah, I can't think of an example of a movie or something where the creator or people involved in it had done something external to the production where I'm like, I'm definitely not going to watch that. Like I go times and I'm like, I'm not watching any more Disney because they did this or that or whatever. And like, sure. But like in terms of like just individual things and being like, oh, this person did something bad. Like I would cast Kevin Spacey. Honestly, I would have a chaperone who would be, you know, like, look, you are not getting out of my eyesight, you know, and you're not like assaulting or harassing anybody on this production, but like, you know, did bad things, terrible things even, but like, does that mean like I wouldn't cast him? No, not really, you know?
That's fair. Yeah, and I think that is where you and I are very different, because for me, I mean, I don't have any casting power, but I think I'd be very disappointed by someone who would cast someone like that,
Mhm.
you know. And I think for me, there's two different things, and what the first most basic level, and this is where oh, but someone showed up in chat just to heckle, so yep, please come in and
Excellent.
heckle.
Welcome,
Um,
Cardiff.
you have between Paul and I disagreeing a lot, you're gonna have a lot to heckle on either side.
Mm-hmm.
Starting that point again, yeah, I think it's the part where you and I disagree, and for me, there's kind of two levels in which I approach this. One of which is just the question of what am I doing with my money, you know,
Sure.
and I don't think J.K. Rowling is gonna, cry because she doesn't get the $4 or 20 cents or whatever it would be, or pounds, whatever it would be.
Pounds are worth a lot more.
Well, true, because I do or don't go to the newest Harry Potter movie, or do or don't buy the latest Harry Potter game.
Yeah.
But there's a quote that I think about all the time when it comes to this stuff, which is there was this man who, during the U.S. involvement with Nicaragua in the 80s under Reagan, who was doing some really terrible, we were doing really terrible things. He stood outside the White House to protest like every day for like 3 straight years.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point someone asked him, like, how do you possibly think you're going to change the president or change the nation by doing this? And he said, I'm not doing this to change the nation. I'm doing this so that the nation doesn't change me.
Oh, right.
And I kind of liked that idea a lot. And I think that's where, for me, in terms of like my money stuff, I think, I do think that the more people who do it, the more we kind of punish people who do things that are economically punished. Like if someone went up and, did physical harm to J.K. Rowling, I don't think that's a good thing. I'm not wanting that to happen. Right. But in terms of like making it, particularly because, and she, I think, is a very good example, because it's like, if someone found her diary and someone's diary said, all these transphobic things, but otherwise no one knew what the heck they were thinking.
Right.
I don't care. It's the fact that she is using the platform that she has to speak words of violence against me and my friends. I don't want to help her build that platform.
Right.
And then with someone like Kevin Spacey, I think the reason why for me it's also important to really not support things, because here's the thing. I think people in Hollywood would
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think people in Hollywood stopped casting him out of their own personal moral outrage. I think they did it because they knew that enough people would be upset if they did cast him and would not go to see it, or would otherwise cause problems, that it would not be worth it. It would not be worth the bad publicity, and maybe a lot of people still would see it, but it would, in the end of the day, their decision there is financial. Yeah. In the same way that the people at Netflix think, you know what, a lot more people are paying attention to Dave Chappelle because we keep putting him on, even though we keep saying these transphobic things. For them, it's the bottom line conversation. And so for me, if I can help affect that bottom line conversation, I want to. And I think why for me it's particularly important with someone like Kevin Spacey is because these are things that for a long time were accepted in Hollywood.
Right.
And that's where it ties into all the Me Too-ness, especially. Though, that's not the only issue there. But I think it's hard, because I do think like our friend Logan, I think, will often comment that, look, if you really believe in this stuff, don't give money to any of these huge studios, because they're all pretty horrible in a lot of ways. And I think that's true. And, at the same time, I've got friends who live in, are very queer and live in small towns in the South where if you don't have much money, Chick-fil-A is the only place you're going to get food, and this is what I'm told. I
understand. Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, especially the fact that they are LGBT of some kind or another, it makes me like, okay, look, this is that we all have to make our own decisions.
Sure.
And I think for me, as a fan, that's what I'm a lot more interested in here, is the question. I don't want to tell people you should spend your money on this, not on that, but I just want people to be thoughtful about it, And like, I think clearly, even if you have a very different bar than I do, you do put thought into this,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, basically, I think what people do to animals is worse than 99% of the things that people like want to cancel people over. And so like, I would just watch nothing if I were to have a bar. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to not watch Rounders because it was New Line Cinema, which was Harvey Weinstein. But I'm certainly, I wouldn't work with Harvey Weinstein.
Right.
Like, and there are like different levels of whatever, and a lot of it has to do with the power that people have,
right,
when they're doing whatever it is. And I mean, I think J.K. Rowling is a great example because she has, like quadrupled down on like, look, this is clearly her stance, right?
Right.
And, I don't really give a lot of money to anyone for any, like pretty much like if I'm going to spend money on entertainment, it's mostly going to be on independent creators when possible.
He mostly uses my profiles to watch things. They mostly use my profiles to watch things.
But yeah, so I have access to a large amount of content, but I don't pay for much content. Right. I am an anarchist. So, I do think that it is good to be deliberate about, what content you want to pay for, and to understand that like there is consequence to every financial transaction, right? Your money is going somewhere. But like also it's really hard to find ways of sending your money not somewhere that you're opposed to. Like, what do you do when your favorite vegan cheese company gets bought out by a food conglomerate? Like,
did that happen?
Yeah, no, that happens all the time. It's just constantly. Okay. Basically, somebody, and that's not just like, I mean, that's a thing that happens in the food world a lot, right? But in all sorts of things. An entertainment company gets bought out by, like, maybe you were really into Instagram and then they got bought by Facebook and you're like, I didn't want to use Facebook, so I was using Instagram. And I know people, I'll say Logan again, right? Because like Logan boycotts Facebook and Amazon, which are two things that are like, those are hard boycotts, right?
Right.
Like a lot of friends are going to be on Facebook, especially like, people like a lot of people our age are on Facebook, right? Those are the demographics of it. So leaving that is sacrificing some means of contact, right? And then, boycotting Amazon is like, it's pretty much the easiest place to get most things. You want a thing, you can probably get it on Amazon, and you can just get all your things on Amazon, and that's pretty easy. But like, that's a stand. But then Logan uses Instagram, right? And I think is as thoughtful about where to spend money and where to spend time and effort, right? I mean, when we're talking about social media, our time is our money, basically, right? We're basically paying them with our attention and with the content we create. But like still there, it's like sometimes you compromise.
And I think that's another case where also it's very easy for people to bring up this hypocrisy idea that I think it's really problematic. And here, this is more about kind of compromise into the celebrity stuff, but I think it's this sort of the same point. Look at any person who travels the world to speak very powerfully and cogently about, climate change. And some climate change denier will be like, oh, if you care so much, why are you getting all those airplanes?
Right.
Like, because we're in an imperfect world.
Yeah.
I don't have control over the people who advertise on this, and I wish I did. I also want to pay the bills and be able to keep making the content that we do. So it's all these compromises. And I think for me, that's, and it ties in a lot to for me, and I don't want this just to be about the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp trial, but that's, I think, kind of like the overall frame, because that's the thing that's so much in the news right now. And certainly that I'm getting asked about all the time. I understand that because of the public perception of what Johnny Depp did or didn't do, his career has pretty much been Kevin Spacey'd,
right?
To a large extent. And I don't know if I know enough to decide if that was good or bad. I think I do know enough from what I know that I don't think let's be honest. I was not very excited to go see Aquaman 2. I very much did not like the first Aquaman movie. Given all that I have learned about Ms. Heard, and the fact that they've decided to keep her on, even though Johnny Depp has been cut from a lot of things, I think there'd probably be one more reason why I'm probably not going to go see it.
Right.
Now again, that changes a lot. And I think one of the things that I think is also important to me is I like to be part of movements, and I remember, on the Poker and podcast that we're talking about, as I said, Paul's having a lot of fun poking fun. He pokes fun at him. They poke fun at themselves a lot too. So that's worthwhile, but also they poke a lot of fun at me. And I at one point said that I was probably not going to go see Doctor Strange because of the whole recasting the Tibetan character because of pressure from the Chinese and stuff like that. And that story may not have been the most accurate. We don't know. There's a lot of details there. But the point is, at one point, it looked like a lot of people were talking about that, and then that kind of shifted. And I was like, well, if there had been a real sort of active call from Tibetans to boycott the movie, I probably would have paid attention. In the same kind of way, there was a pretty active call for people asking them to boycott Ghost in the Shell because of Scarlett Johansson and her being in that role. And I didn't go to see it. There was sort of some similar talk about Black Widow, but then I think a lot of kind of feminist leaders and content creators and stuff, who I respect, said, look, we don't love ScarJo, but this movie is so important for having a strong female character in it that we're probably going to go. I'm not just a sheep or a lemming. I'm going to make my own opinions, but those things matter, and I think so this may change. Maybe I'm going to find out that there's something amazing about the Aquaman 2 movie that I really need to see. But yeah, I don't. We'll get more into that in the third thing. But this is perfectly fine to talk about it. For me, because I do think that this is where a lot of people want. This is where a lot of people want to draw. Yeah, let me start the whole thing again. Because I do think this is why a lot of people get so involved in the celebrity thing, is they want to now make their decisions about who to support, who to not to, based on their ability to pass judgment on others.
Right.
And I think that's where, yes, I'll do that with J.K. Rowling, because as you said, she'll be very clear. Like, she has, there's no suspicion about J.K. Rowling's feelings. Kevin Spacey, it was very clearly known, and he admitted like the terrible things he did. Other things like that. Something like this, like, I think for a lot of people, it seems there's a real attempt to sort of pick it all apart and decide Johnny wins or Amber loses or vice versa. And therefore, like, I'm going to give all my money to one and all my money not to another. I've seen enough to know that these are two very broken people who had a very toxic relationship with each other. And as far as I can tell, they both did a lot of terrible things to each other. And you can say that one of them was more the instigator, and thus the other one maybe is not as at fault. That's, I think, where I really get off the train, is that, to me, that idea that we could go to that level of granularity and pass judgment, when literally you're in a court that's going to try to pass judgment, but even then, who the hell can pass judgment on a relationship? I just sort of feel like I'm probably at this point not super inclined to watch a movie that either one of them are in. Mm-hmm. But that's where it stops for me. I'll take that from the surface, and then going deeper, that's where it feels like it gets really problematic, at least as I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of come to the same conclusion, but then the opposite course of action, which is like, I don't know what happened between them. A bunch of people are going to know some things about who different people say happened, and a court's going to make some sort of ruling. As far as I'm concerned, that's their shit. Yeah. And like, if there's a movie I want to see that one of them's in, I'll see it. Like, I'm not going to punish Jason Momoa and James Wan for like Amber Heard being in the movie. And maybe Wan, maybe one of them could have like made a big deal out of it. But also, like, maybe it's not really for them to make a big, I don't know. And, I'm not saying like, ooh, I can't wait to see Aquaman 2. But like, Randall Park might be in it too. So like, I don't know. If I want to see it, I'll see it. I'm not going to go see it. I'll watch it on someone's HBO account. But like, that's fair. But and to me, I agree with you though. Your point of like, you can't necessarily get down to like, oh, but what really happened? It's like, you're not a detective. Like, you don't actually have personal connections to these people. Like, you can either be like, well, some messed up stuff happened there, I just don't want to have anything to do with it. Or like, some messed up stuff happened there, and like, whatever, that's not, for me, basically. Right. I do think that the J.K. Rowling and like Kevin Spacey, they're two. J.K. Rowling did what she did, continued to do it, and that's her. It's not, to me, it's not that that's her beliefs, right? It's that that's her agenda, right? Whereas, like, I feel like with Kevin Spacey, maybe what Kevin Spacey did was worse, or maybe not as bad, or you could like, you can rank however you want to rank it, or not, but like, those are past actions, and one of the reasons I think it did make sense to cancel House of Cards, or at least to stop it or whatever, is like, well, that was behavior that was going on set, right? And so like, if you're going to try and do something with Kevin Spacey in the thing, then you're gonna have to find a way to have that not happening on set. But also like, I don't feel like someone should necessarily serve a life sentence for something that they did in the past, even if it was a pattern of behavior. I think there's something different between like something that happened or something that someone did and then they stopped doing compared to something that's ongoing. And
Right.
you know, and you can say like, well, is there some contrition? Is there this or that? And I think that's very reasonable. But I had a point where that was going, but it's gone. So whatever.
Well, I mean, I think you bring up a couple of very important points, though. One is that, like, to me, it's hard to talk about Amber Heard, Johnny Depp, and Kevin Spacey in the same conversation, because I do think what Kevin Spacey did, and granted, it's been a number of years, I don't remember the details, but I think my understanding is there's certainly things that he did that I think, if statute, like criminal prosecution was very much a possibility, you know, which maybe the case didn't hold up, but like, you know, sexual assault laws and stuff like that, you know, were broke. And as far as now, I don't even want to try to comment on whether or not that's true about Heard Depp, but I understand it's a degree of difference.
Mm-hmm.
But even with those, like, those are terrible things that those folks did. And yeah, for me, I am very much on the kind of like, I don't, you know, restorative justice and all that kind of thing. But unless I see major change and retribution, as I was saying, yeah, I don't want to be giving my money to something that Kevin Spacey is in. But to me, Kevin Spacey isn't out there actively campaigning for, the lessening of laws around, getting people drunk and doing sexual things with them. Right. Or, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp aren't making public statements about, that domestic violence shouldn't be enforced the way it is.
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling is doing that. J.K. Rowling is actively encouraging people to, and granted, J.K. Rowling is personal for me because I'm one of the people she's attacking. Sure. Like, granted, she's much more interested in trans women, to be sure. But like, so I do think that there's a major difference. Like, it's a platform, same with, I mean, I was getting the name of the actress and the name of the character mixed up, but the woman who was on Mandalorian, who was playing the
Gina
person
Carano
from Alderaan,
is the actress.
Gina Carano. Yeah. Thank you. Who's playing, I keep wondering, she's Cara Dune, not Cara Thrace.
Right.
Mixing those two characters up. She was actively campaigning for people not to be wearing masks and not to be getting vaccinated and stuff like that. And to me, that's doing a level that I think for me that at that point, it becomes you're using your public platform to do harm. Mm-hmm. And so actively contributing to your platform. But then again, I mean, Kevin Spacey was able to have as much power as he did and others because of the thing, the platform he had. So it's not a binary. It's gradations. The other thing I think for me, and I'm curious if this is for you, one thing I find is that there's like, I can't say I love the movie Ghostbusters, there's nothing, that's a bad example actually. There's content that I love that I then found out terrible things about the creator. It doesn't necessarily make me unlove it unless it's connected. Right. So for example, I grew up in New York City in a Jewish household and also it's New York City. Woody Allen speaks so much to my sense of humor, to a lot of my life philosophy. I think some of his movies are absolutely brilliant. A movie like Crime and Punishment, and I also think Woody Allen is an awful person. Crimes and Misdemeanors. Thank you. Yeah, Crime and Punishment is a book that's clearly kind of referencing. I also think he's a horrible person and have a lot of real, judgments about him. A movie like Crimes and Misdemeanors that's about life and death and morality and judgment and things like that, I can still watch and think is a fantastic movie. Any of the movies that are about him romancing an actress and a character who's significantly younger. Right? Yeah, Manhattan, absolutely. But really anything that's where it's Woody Allen is 50s romancing an actress and a character in her 20s, I couldn't watch anymore. And I tried to watch The Cosby Show. Oh. And so much of that show is built around Bill Cosby being this incredibly wholesome, lovable, everyone's dad character. I can't watch that anymore.
Yeah.
But Usual Suspects, I still think is going to be a fantastic movie. And because there's nothing in that movie that connects it all to what Kevin Spacey was doing personally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also one of the greatest movies of all time. But and arguably maybe the best acting performance ever. But I digress. But yeah, no, I feel you. And I think I should make clear that if somebody doesn't want to watch a thing because of how they feel about a particular creator, whether it's because of the connection between the content and what that person did, or just solely for what that person did, I'm certainly not trying to talk anyone out of it, Yeah. I do feel like I don't know. I when it comes to this sort of movements and whatever, I'm not super like I'm not super into it, you know, but
Yeah.
in terms of like individual actions and like if a thing or a person makes you feel a certain way and that's not how you want to feel, like yeah, don't watch their stuff. Like
Yeah.
I don't think I could watch the Cosby Show now. You know,
Yeah.
I have not tried to rewatch the Cosby Show. I had a friend who was on it when she was a kid, and
Yeah.
like I wonder, like I'm kind of curious to watch that episode, you know. But like, but it just yeah, that's. But also, I mean,
Yeah.
when you know when we're talking about some of these things, it's like it's not a binary, right? Person did bad
Yeah.
thing, person did nothing bad that we're aware of. It's like there's, you know,
Cosby is such an extreme example. Maybe, for me, maybe a better example is Buffy,
oh,
where
okay.
like, I still think Joss Whedon is a brilliant writer in a lot of ways, and I think the TV show Buffy made some very important advances in terms of women characters on screen. I also feel like now knowing a lot more about his own relations with women and not just his own personal life, but also stuff he did on set to women actresses and stuff like that, does make me like watch Buffy through somewhat different eyes, you know? And it doesn't mean I don't think I'm not as excited to watch it. I probably see it in a different way. It's not to me quite the Cosby Show where I can't watch it, but I'm less inclined to watch it. And certainly some episodes I might be like, I might see the kind of female empowerment message in this pretty differently now.
Right. Yeah, and you know, I respect that. I mean, I haven't gone back and watched any of those for a long time, but you know, it is the sort of thing where it's like something can be very powerful to people at a point in time, right? But then maybe not play the same way later, particularly with you know, knowledge of what's going on. I mean, for the most part, that's kind of like why I just don't want to know. Like I have an idea of some of the Joss Whedon stuff, but I'm like, I'm just not interested, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I think Joss Whedon's one of the best directors of a generation. And like, I'm not interested in not being able to enjoy, you know, his creations, you know, but like, that's not to say that like I don't care about whatever harm he caused to the people that were involved, but it's just like I don't know. There's like so much pain and suffering in the world. Like it's you know, it's like it's not to like the word isn't marginalized. There's another word, but I'll go with that for now. But like minimize, right? It's not to minimize whatever, but it's just like there's a lot of things where I'm just like, that doesn't feel like the most important thing to me. Whereas I know it's the most important thing to, or it could be the most important thing to that person, right? Certainly at that time. And it's like, I don't know. I think there's something to be said for like, sort of like emotional bandwidth. And you know what I mean? Like, and it's like do I want to go down this rabbit hole? Sure. You know, like every time there's a shooting, it's horrible, right? Every individual shooting is horrible. The fact that there are as many as there are is extra horrible. But like, I personally, when I hear about one, I'm like, well, that's horrible. But like, I don't feel moved in a direction, you know, because it's like, we still have literally hundreds of people dying every day of COVID in the US alone. And it's like, you know, 20 people get murdered. That's horrible. But it's like, there's already so much horrible. It's like, it doesn't really move the needle for me. And that's not like, that doesn't make it not horrible, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like you're like out there going rah, 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 guns, guns, guns.
Oh,
I mean,
no.
like you, and I think I'm in the same way, you know, and I've kind of noticed that in terms of the way I consume the news coverage of those kind of things. And we're going to pull it back to the celebrity thing, but I was kind of agreeing with you there. Like, you know, I saw that, I'm outraged, I'm horrified, I'm saddened, have all these feelings about, you know, how little we continue to do. And I don't want to be cynical and hopeless, but I see people trying to gear up to get things done. And I don't have much faith that it'll happen. But like 10 years ago, I probably would have sought out, you know, the interviews with the parents and sort of the biographies of the people. I don't do that anymore.
Right.
Like, because I just can't. And pulling it back to, and I think if you can, great, but also it's okay to not, you know, you don't have to be emotionally masochistic to prove that you are like, you know, and not to say like, I don't think
like if that's what you want to do, but like if that's not what you want to do,
if it helps you, great. Like... And certainly if you're the person, you know, I think if you think your gun rights are more important than what's happening, then you should read a little bit about it. But that's a whole other story and different content.
I think it's a little direct though, in terms of like you have shooters who have become celebrities.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Like,
it's kind of like we talked about how the Batman movie kind of got into that a little bit.
Right. Exactly.
And like pulling it back to this though, it was actually a creator who I really liked who talked about this because, Ray Fisher, who played Cyborg, has raised some very important concerns about like the racism he dealt with on set, and what he dealt with. And there was a black TikToker who I follow. I'm trying to remember who, if I can find it was a couple of years ago now, but if I can find it, I'll definitely bring it back. And he was saying, look, like Ray Fisher's going to be fine. Ray Fisher is not like is it Ray Fisher or Roy Fisher? Make sure I get that right. Cyborg actor. Okay.
I thought it was right.
He was kind of saying like Ray Fisher is not dealing with like the problems of him, like the person who's having trouble putting food on their table because no one will hire him because they speak AAVE or because they have dreads or whatever. But also that it's important to look at what happened to see like, yeah, once you get on the Hollywood set, it doesn't mean that you're free of racism. This hits all levels and that kind of thing. And that's I think a good way to get into the last part of this, which by the way, folks, good thing to see about Paul and I. And Paul will make jokes about this from 5 years ago. We still haven't learned this lesson. This conversation started as, could we get a full episode out of this? Probably not. How about so we also like do half this an episode and half the questions, and we're not even done with this topic. So,
I literally went for a walk just before we recorded and was like, yeah, I probably only have 1 or 2 paragraphs to say about this.
Oops.
Only if I never hit the enter key.
Yeah. Here's a good challenge for you. Throw out a topic that you think we couldn't stretch out for more than 10 minutes. We'll probably prove you wrong. But so the last thing I think is to me, the celebrity issues also become important when they are a microcosm of things that everybody else deals with, and I think this is both good and bad, and I think the Amber Heard trial to me is the perfect example of this, because I think on the one hand, looking at the racism that even Ray Fisher faces, and talking about the racism that everyone faces, all people of color face in employment or all can face, Me Too, came out of like celebrity women talking about how they had been sexually harassed and gone through horrible things in the workplace. And it got people talking about Weinstein isn't the only one doing it, but Weinstein can get away with it. And the guy who runs the local grocery store and does it to their female employees can probably get away with it. And so those kind of things, to me, the microcosm become really important. To me, the danger, and this is what I'm very much seeing with Amber Heard, is when it becomes the gotcha moment, where and again, I've not followed the trial, but I have to some extent followed the conversation around the trial. And so at first I was seeing folks who were like, hey, listen, we're actually talking about yes, men can be the victims or the survivors of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Yes, it isn't always just one direction. Yes, we don't talk enough about why men are oppressed or we don't talk enough about the way men can be, victims in these kind of situations. And that was great. And I think that was very healing for a lot of people. And I think conversation around that is healing. And I think is a good conversation to have. I think though, and I tell me if I'm wrong, but I think this kind of speaks to your victim thing you're talking about. The number of people who then started coming forward and doing one of two things, either A, saying, look at all the ways Amber lied, and maybe she did, but I think my understanding is pretty clearly proven that she did, but I don't know for sure. That doesn't matter. But let's suppose that she did. The number of people who are using that to say, so look, Me Too is all wrong. The idea of trust women, believe women, because we have this one example of someone who shouldn't, we should go back to, never doing that. Always, there has to be a witness kind of things. I think is really problematic. And also, Justin, now I've seen some more people writing about this. The degree to which Amber Heard has become a public laughingstock in our society because of this. And everything from the faces that she's made, that a lot of there was a thing at one point where she was blowing her nose and people did a freeze frame of the camera of the film while editing some things out to make it look like she was snorting cocaine on the witness stand.
Meme's gonna meme.
Meme's gonna meme, but I it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, and some people have done some great analysis of compare this to the way Cosby was talked about or R. Kelly or things like that. And that it is to such an extent that it's hard to not see some misogyny at work here.
Mm-hmm.
That there isn't some level of guys who are mad that women are getting too uppity and too much in power and this kind of thing, and are glad to see this woman torn down. So that's more about the trial. I don't know how much you want to comment on that directly, but like that, I think that's for me the other place where I care about it is where I don't care about the story itself, the event itself. I care about the story around it and the narratives that are being formed around it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like insofar as there is value to something like that, that's what it is. You know, the same way that somebody can make a piece of fiction that tells a story, you know.
Right.
And I mean, when it's an actual court case, I guess it's like, well, here we have evidence that's presumably, you know, it's evidence. It's supposed to be, you know, facts and whatever. It's reality based. That's not, you know, fabricated as in by a writer, right? And so I think it is sort of just like another way of telling a story, except it's a story where you're like, no, but this really happened. But I do think that stories often, people are like, well, this thing happened this one time, so this is always how it is. And it's like, people are just very, very poor at understanding uncertainty and probability. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like somebody says something happened, and if it's something that happens very frequently, there's a very good chance that it's true. Right. There's also a chance that it's not. But like that doesn't mean it's 50-50. Right. And I do think things, you know, the like he said, she said, or he said, or whatever, kind of it poses a problem in terms of justice and in terms of knowing what happened. Like you just don't know what happened, right? And that's, to some extent, I think that's a little bit of an intractable problem. That's just, you know, that's the way things are, and people need to accept, like, sort of, I don't know, I try to like look at things as like probability distributions, like such and such probably happened, but it's also possible that such and such happened, or such and such almost definitely happened, or sometimes it's like, no, that's what happened, you know? And so, you know, I think taking what I understand to be the exception, which doesn't mean that it's the only exception, right? It doesn't mean it never happens otherwise. But taking that to try to discredit all the other times that things were the opposite, like, is ridiculous. And, you know, that's a potential problem of one instance getting magnified so large, right? Is that you end up basically focusing on anecdotal data. It's like, oh, well, this one thing happened this one time, and I'm going to draw conclusions. The only conclusion you can draw is that this is a thing that can happen. And
anecdote is the exact word I was thinking of this whole time, you know, because at the end of the day, yes, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp are much more public figures than most people who go through ugly divorces, but it's still just one example, you know. And I think even the most ardent Me Too supporters would always say, you know, look, yes, there can be women who lie. Yeah, that can happen. Like it to me, in a lot of ways, I think, and I don't want to kind of make it just about this one issue, but I think, like, you know, it's kind of like in the same way of like, I think of Me Too as very similar to Black Lives Matter, in that what both are saying is like, look, right now, it's not that all lives matter. It's that right now, Black lives are treated with almost no respect. And so, yeah, let's kind of try to throw it back the other way. And in the same way, like, overwhelmingly, when it comes to issues of sexual harassment and sexual assault, women are traditionally not believed at all. And so having a strong, like, let's kind of try to push it back the other way. Let's try to push it back the other way, because yes, the overwhelming number of times it's not lies. These are real situations. So I think that kind of makes a lot of sense. And I want to kind of move off of there's one last point about the celebrity stuff that I think we're not going to talk about for too long. So the last thing about the celebrity thing that I think we want to bring up, and at first I thought it might turn into much conversation, but I think it's mostly just like, yeah, don't do this. Like, I think for me, I think one of the times where I feel celebrityness gets very problematic, and I have to say it, especially in Star Wars, the Star Wars fandom, and so we're talking about it a lot right now because of Kenobi. I think it is completely legitimate to have negative feelings about creators. You know, as Paul is hearing, as he goes back to the old episodes, we used to joke that there was a quota that I had to bash on Zack Snyder at least once, and Paul mostly joined in and sometimes contributed his own.
It's fine.
Paul
it's fine.
mostly jumped in. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Paul mostly jumped in and contributed their own. You know, but like if someone told me that they went and like firebombed his house or tried to like do something terrible to, you know, Zack Snyder, I'd be like, no, like we're talking about their work as a creator and our feelings about their work as a creator. And Star Wars in particular has a very bad history of this. Jake Lloyd, the actor who played young Anakin Skywalker, got horribly bullied to the point of like having massive psychological trauma and a very troubled life for a long time because of it. Ahmed Best, who played Jar Jar, similarly, like I think it's very legit for people to say like that was a very racist character in the way it was written and directed, but then people went after this young actor who frankly was probably just like, you get a chance to get a Star Wars job, you're probably going to take a Star Wars job as a young actor. You know, and like and just much more recently with Rose Tran.
Kelly Marie Tran.
Kelly Marie Tran,
She
thank you,
Rose.
played Rose Tico.
Yeah,
I mean names bad. I'm much better with numbers, as Paul.
Much better with numbers.
Math. You get to hear the creation of Math. You listen to Poker and Podcast. But yeah, like, you know, and now like, you know, there've been comments about like, oh, you know, I think it is very legitimate to see Kathleen Kennedy as having a particular responsibility for a lot of the things in recent Star Wars that people don't like. I think that can be there's very binary thinking that sometimes emerges of like Kathleen Kennedy good. Everything bad is Kathleen Kennedy, everything good is Dave Filoni, and that can get kind of misogynistic. But if you don't love Kathleen Kennedy, that's fine. If you don't love her creations, I certainly have a lot of questions with her. But we're seeing posts about like wanting to do violence against her, or, you know, on our episode on the Star Wars Universe podcast, we talk a lot about well, I don't want to spoil it if you've not watched Kenobi yet, but there is a child actor who plays a significant part in the Kenobi show. And some people think that their acting performance is great. Some people don't like their acting performance. But I've seen TikToks going around about, yeah, I just want to like elbow that actor in the head. This is a 10-year-old people are talking about. And to me, this isn't just a point about toxic fandom, but I think it is a point about celebrity, which is that right now, when we do have so much access to celebrity, I think it's not psychosomatic relationships. What is it? Pseudo-social relationships are things people talk about a lot. That now because people see people on TikTok and on Twitter and on Instagram, it creates a psychological feeling that we have more of a close relationship with these folks than we actually do. And I think if that leads you feeling like personally betrayed because of what someone creates, like take a step back. If it makes you feeling like you want to do like physical violence to a creator, take a step back.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that I think all of those feelings are valid. You know, like you feel what you feel. But, you know, what you do about those feelings is a choice.
Right.
And that, you know, wanting to physically harm someone or just threaten someone or make jokes about someone suffering physical harm, they'll be like, oh, it's just a joke. It's like, okay, I'm all for comedy pushing boundaries, but like it's not like it's got to be funny if you want to get a buy from me. Mm-hmm. And it usually doesn't seem particularly funny to me. There have been a lot of shows that I have felt like very strongly about, like, wow, you created something that, you know, I really loved, and that, you know, often fiction aims to be emotionally manipulative, but even if it's not really the goal, it often will succeed in that, right? And then I can see a feeling of betrayal of like, oh, you emotionally manipulate. And then usually that's when I just stop watching something, when I feel like they're so overtly trying to be emotionally manipulative. You know, I will say that like I'm not overly fond of Kathleen Kennedy's influence on the Star Wars universe overall. Mm-hmm. You know, I do love many of the characters from the sequel trilogy. I really don't like the way the movies sit in the overall mythos, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
There are episodes of Rebels, maybe only one, but like a couple that like Dave Filoni made that I really don't like and feel very strongly about and feel are very emotionally manipulative. Some of them are some of people's, or one of them's like some of people's favorite episode. Some people's favorite episode.
Curiosity, which one?
Jedi Knights. I almost quit the show, remember?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and I was like, because it just felt, and I won't spoil the plot, and if you want to listen to what happens in Rebels, listen to the Star Wars Universe podcast where Matthew and Sarah and Riki go into detail. And I imagine, I think all of you really like that episode, right? I don't know. We'll find out.
I think we haven't got to in our coverage yet. But
no, it's pretty far down the line, but it felt very predictably emotionally manipulative to me, and I really didn't like it, you know. But I didn't think about like sending angry messages to Dave Filoni, and this, you know, when I saw Last Jedi, I wasn't like, I must, you know, Rian Johnson must be, you know, destroyed, like, you know. And I will say that it feels like odd that Kathleen Kennedy got more anger about like that movie than like Rian Johnson did, from my understanding, right? It's like, but and then I saw Knives Out and I'm like, oh, dude can make a great movie, but you know, but like, yeah, it's there's a big line between being like, look, you made something and I really, really don't like it. It made me feel bad, you know? Yeah. And I feel like I maybe even think that was a little bit your goal. And like, fuck you for that, you know? Yeah. But also like, all right, now go about your life. And like, now I'll go watch something else. Like, I'm not rewatching this, you know? And that's, you know, it's like, on the one hand, it's like, there's a, you know, I think there can be an impulse to tell people like, oh, don't take it so seriously. It's just a story. It's like, yeah, but the goal of these stories is to get you really emotionally invested in them. So I think it's fine and even good to feel strongly about what happens in the stories. It's just like, then don't go around threatening people or saying bad things about them as people. Be like, oh, I really don't like Zack Snyder's movies, you know?
Yeah, I think that's such a good way of putting it, because I think that's true. I think like, you know, I think there's a lot of people who did blame Mark Hamill, for example, for what happened to Luke Skywalker, you know, and said, how dare he take this? He should have refused it. And yeah, I think, you know, I think Last Jedi is the perfect illustration of where Luke's character would have gone. You and many others disagree, and I think that's completely legit. And I think, you know, feeling very betrayed by what happens to his character, I think is a legitimate feeling. We should get invested in these characters. When it then becomes a Mark Hamill did this to me, you know, or this author. And the thing we talked about with Kathleen Kennedy, I think, is another great example of like one more kind of tangential part of the celebrity thing that I think is important, which is that once we get past the very specific things like of an actor or a writer, but even then, like, movies and TV shows are not made in a vacuum. There are so many things happening. And like, I part of why I will sometimes be a bit defensive of Kathleen Kennedy is not because I think I have just as many critiques about like what I would call I think the Kathleen Kennedy era of Star Wars had a lot of problems at the start. And someone made the decision to have Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams both direct movies in the same trilogy without having much communication with each other. Yeah. And I think that's a decision that borders on like, I was going to make a joke of criminal negligence. Like, of course it's not a criminal thing, but it's like, you were given a trust of these movies, and that's a horrible violation of it. I think it's easiest to think that Kathleen Kennedy is probably the one who made that decision. But I don't know. I don't know what the higher ups at Disney thought. I don't know how much like it was like maybe they tried to get them a room and just either Ryan or JJ. Like, there's so many other factors to that's the like why I will sometimes defend Kathleen Kennedy just a little bit, is because I just I don't know how much we really know that it's her personally making these bad decisions. And then I do feel like I think it was Kenneth Kennedy. I don't think that everyone has problems with Kathleen Kennedy is misogynistic by any means, but I think that the sort of uber narrative that is formed around her, the fact that a lot of people who are saying it are also the kind of people who say like women didn't have a place in Star Wars fandom, like it's hard for me to separate those kind of two things out, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, personally, it always feels awkward agreeing with people whom I disagree with on so many things. you know, and it's like people's criticism of those movies being that like there's a black man and a white woman and like this isn't Star Wars, and I'm like, no, the problem is that they specifically pushed those characters away from each other because they're racist, you know?
Yeah.
And that it's like this like white feminism as opposed to like an actual like inclusive, intersectional feminism, like, you know, and
like I'm someone who very much dislikes Rise of Skywalker, and then I listen to people say, yeah, Rise of Skywalker's garbage because Rey is garbage. Rey is not a Skywalker. And I'm like, no, I'm not with them.
That's not the problem. The problem is that it's like watching a video game with a plot that doesn't make any sense. And the joy of it is the schadenfreude of your friends who enjoyed The Last Jedi. But
That's fair.
But yeah, I totally. There's a lot of times when it's like, and I honestly, personally, this is the first time I think on a podcast I've even said the name Kathleen Kennedy. Because like I generally don't want to talk specifically about because she gets so much misogynistically tinged criticism, you know, whether that's the root of it or whether it's criticism that there would be anyway that then carries this additional aspect. And it's like, I don't want to do that, you know, but like, you know, if you ask me, like, do you like what she's done with Star Wars? No, not so much. I mean, a lot of her earlier movies I think are fantastic, and you know, I mean, but yeah, people. Then you get this whole narrative, and it's like, honestly, just show me the movie, and I'll either like it or I won't, and then I'll talk about it for 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Or years.
All right. Well, we did promise this. I think it's there's a lot more we could talk about that, as with everything, and always write in with questions, thoughts, ideas. We're gonna take a quick ad break and then talk to Paul about the we're taking a quick ad break and then talk to, you know, looking back at some of the old stuff we've done and where we think about it now.
It's an ad break that goes right here. Oh, I could like probably put a Twitch ad on.
It's an ad break going right to your ear.
All right. That's staying in the
video. Yeah, can't come up with any more. Anyway, welcome back. So Paul, you're getting to kind of go back in time a little bit. I have some specific questions I want to go to you with. And again, this was also to help fill out an episode. We've already hit an episode time, so I'm not going to go too deep on this. We might just be starting to record a second episode. We'll see how long this goes, but I do need to get some sleep. But let me kind of start. Like, what's it like going back in time? Like, I'm going to keep saying that. What's it like hearing the podcast from so many years ago and like what you and I were both saying about things, and what's kind of experience been like?
It's a trip. Like it's just funny listening to things that I kind of remember what sort of headspace I was in then and you were in then, and sort of how many things are the same, but then how many things are different also. You know, there's a lot of points that we make that I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And then at one point, I think I claimed that Joel Schumacher did more harm with Joel Schumacher's Batmans than Zack Snyder did with Batman vs Superman. And you know what? At the end of recording the first draft of that video, I was like, maybe I'll go back and rewatch Batman vs Superman. And since then, I've come to my senses and instead watched all the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, although I fast forwarded through everything that wasn't Kenobi. But yeah, it just, you know, it is interesting how an opinion of something can change without like re-experiencing the thing. You know, like, and I can remember, basically this goes for Aquaman too, but like as well, not the second one, which doesn't exist. Batman v Superman, when it came out, there was an element where I was like, look, this movie isn't that bad. And I think in terms of like an act of filmmaking, I don't think it's that bad. There are things that they do with Bruce Wayne and Batman that just are so not my Batman. And there are choices mostly involving slow motion and telling certain parts of stories that have already happened so many times that I think are like, I would argue are maybe objectively bad decisions, you know, but there's some subjectivity there as well, acknowledged, you know. but there was a little bit of like sort of DC defensiveness, I think, on my part in terms of that, and even when the Joss Whedon Justice League came out, and I was sort of like, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's good, but it's just like kind of like an adventure, an action movie, and like whatever. And then the Zack Snyder mega cut came out, or like the opposite of cut, whatever it is, when you don't cut anything and you just stretch it, right? It's like dough, like you just kept pulling it with slow motion, which I still think is like, subjectively, I think is like the most bad movie I've ever seen. But, bringing it back to like earlier, like I think I'd probably rather hang out with Zack Snyder than Joss Whedon. I don't know that much about Zack Snyder's personal life, but like, he might be a better dude than Joss Whedon,
I mean, like, I think one of the things that because I've been listening to some of your podcasts about your videos about it, and one of the things that makes a lot of fun is also he's playing poker, and there's one great time that I'll ask Paul about in just a second, where like playing the poker and the point you were making kind of dovetailed pretty nicely. But one of the things that I've kind of really put together that I think you and I didn't have the vocabulary for, that we now are saying a lot more, I certainly am, and I think you as well, that I'm coming to recognize an important difference between, is this a well-made movie, and especially since so few movies are standalones anymore, how does this movie contribute to the overall story that it's a part of? Because like, for example, I think if you made a movie about some random adventurers who are flying through space to try and stop a galaxy-wide takeover by a bad person and dealing with some mystical stuff, and they were going to have some adventures, and they were going to have a bad guy turns sort of good again, that Rise of Skywalker would be a perfectly fine way to spend a couple of hours.
Right.
There's a lot of humor. The spaceship battles are really well shot. The plot's kind of inconsistent and wacky, but if you sever it from everything Star Wars related, I think it's a fine movie. And I think, frankly, a lot of the acting performances, especially by Rey, Finn, and Poe, are really quite good. I think Attack of the Clones is a movie that like contributes far more to the Star Wars. Like, I think it is a helpful addition to the Anakin story and to the Star Wars story. I think technically it's an awful movie.
Right.
I think the dialogue and the acting and the direction make it borderline unwatchable, and so it's kind of like looking at and I think BVS is kind of in that, like, BVS to me has a lot more awful slow-mo than Rise of Skywalker does, but mostly I dislike it because it's so very much not a Batman that I recognize in any way, shape, or form.
I think that's a really good distinction to make. I mean, when we were doing the Obi-Wan Kenobi podcast, right, you were talking about the sort of feeling like the sequel trilogy, but mostly that the sequel trilogy doesn't necessarily like all fit really well with the rest of Star Wars canon, and doesn't necessarily take it somewhere that's really constructive. Like, just from like the I was going to call it the Phantom Awakens. No, from the Force Awakens, which is basically, let's just reboot things, but not really reboot it, right? Like, but all of those movies are well made, right? Yeah, they're executed well. Like, Attack of the Clones is just all like proto green screen, like it's just like mostly CGI, people working in front of just these not backgrounds, and then the dialogue is bad, and like Natalie Portman isn't even good in it, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you
have to be a very good director to squeeze to make Natalie Portman not act well,
right? That's a skill, that's its own skill. That's very niche, but like it just, but if you just say, okay, these things happen, and then you show me the Clone Wars, it's like, oh yeah, good. Like Riki was making a point on the Kenobi cast that, that he's like happy that all those things exist because of the other things that we get from them, kind of, right? And yeah, like, if you told me, okay, you can either not have the prequel trilogy, and then you don't get Clone Wars or Rebels, or you can have the prequel trilogy, you had to watch it when you watched it, and then you also get these fantastic animated shows. Like, yeah, that's okay, deal. I don't have to rewatch the prequels. again.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And like the sequels, like, did we get The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett because The Force Awakens came out and was successful, and The Last Jedi came out and was successful, and Solo came out and bombed?
Yeah.
Maybe, right? And if so, okay, you know, I can decanonize anything I want in my head, you know?
Right.
And it's like, that doesn't have to influence how you feel about it. It's just how, you know, like the last season of Dexter did not happen in my version of Dexter.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sorry, you know, and the newest one definitely didn't happen. But I just think it's like, yeah, sometimes something, I mean, and you know, granted, talking about the sequel trilogy, it is kind of like those, you know, one of them I feel like steps on the narrative, and the other one you feel like steps on the narrative, and something definitely steps on something. Like, no matter, I mean, you can enjoy all of them, but you can't really argue that they all fit together really nicely, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I think, like, each movie I think is quite well done. You know,
Cinematography. Yeah.
My headphones are having trouble.
Oh.
You know, I think each movie is well done individually. Like, you know, I know people who hate The Last Jedi and think the Holdo maneuver makes literally no sense, but will still be like, but cinematographically, like, in terms of in terms of movie making, like that shot is just fantastic. Like, and there are people who will say, and people will agree. That's fine.
I feel more negative feelings towards The Last Jedi than perhaps any other film that I've ever seen in terms of like the movie itself and the story. And I think there are parts that are visually beautiful. You know, I think there are scenes that are very, very well executed. I just don't like the story, you know, and there's some things I have some other complaints, but like, in terms of just like objectively people doing their craft outside of the writer's room, like, it's a really well made movie.
And I think that's a good way to transition to kind of one of the other things I wanted to ask you about. We're going to truncate this a little bit because we can do more of it next time. Actually, no, I'll be this way. And you know, that one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, I think we're going to wait for next time. I think we're going to try and do a little bit of these, like, kind of, you know, drop in one or two of these things at the end of most episodes. But I really enjoyed hearing you go back to listen to our coverage of Suicide Squad.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and granted, you had a little fun with me with a name. I referred to it as Suicidal Villains.
I mean, you had a little fun with the name.
Yeah, also true. Also true. I had a lot of fun with names until someone pointed out to me there's this thing called search engine optimization that I should be caring about. So we're gonna be a little more boring with the names going forward. But because one thing I'll be curious to hear your thoughts about this. We'll save it for another time. But if you want to say a quick word about it now, but for me, one thing I realized is I'll just throw it out there now. We can just have a quick chat about it. One of the things I disliked most about the original Suicide Squad movie was how much, at least as I saw it, it romanticized and sexualized and kind of made sort of a like, oh, if you're really weird and screwed up, like Joker Harley are like relationship goals, you know?
Right.
And the fact that later movies have made so very clear how toxic and awful that relationship was makes that part of Suicide Squad a lot more appealing to, like, a lot easier for me to watch.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, I mean, I didn't quite have that feeling when I saw it the first time, but I do recognize that, you know, how it can be interpreted that way. You know, I felt like there was like some romanticism, but then also I think it's evident that some of the, you know, the negativity there, right?
Right.
The harm that's being done. But I absolutely think that Birds of Prey and the Suicide Squad, they take that first movie and they put it in a very different context. I think a much better, more interesting context, and I think that's powerful, you know. And
so.
And that's the thing about these movie series, is that one movie, like, it always, it's a thing on its own, and then it's like, how does it interact with other movies? And I think that that's important, you know, and it's interesting how that works. And it can go both ways though, right? Like, later movies can kind of step on earlier movies, like, say, The Rise of Skywalker, like, Anakin, we don't care about your story. You're like a footnote, you know. Yeah.
You didn't really kill the Emperor. That's not going to matter anymore.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, there's a cool story that I want you to talk about. Oh,
Speaking of Kill the Emperor, I just want to say that we got some positive feedback on your title for the episode, Who Can We Kill?
Oh, yeah.
Which is about the opposite of that. But, I think that was an excellent title. So I wanted to give,
Yeah. And I want to give a quick shout out to your coverage of that, because that episode is all about, like, how is it that Hollywood sort of codes villains in different ways to say it's ethically okay for our heroes to kill these people, and how that can be manipulative, and just the questions of, like, how do we, like in Suicide Squad, for example, like, when good people, normal people are brain controlled, is it okay to kill them? And
right.
Also, but one of the things I really appreciated there, because I do think it shows a lot of the growth there that's happened with both of us and with our podcasting. There's a moment where I make a comment about meat eating, and you today kind of stopped the podcast. No, actually, it was about something. No, there was one thing about meat eating, and then also about something else. Where you kind of like stopped the podcast. I'm like, at the time there was a comment that you decided not to make, but you wanted to make it now and talk more about sort of why, the fact that animal life isn't regarded as important to you was matters. And you now talk about that a lot more on the podcasts. And I was realizing when in your video, it's confusing because we're talking about so many different things.
Yeah.
You sort of are like, I wish I was talking more about, animal rights back then. And I was like, wait, but you aren't. Oh, okay, no, yeah, that's right. Like, it wasn't as much a topic we got into a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was a really cool moment, and one more reason why I really appreciate the way you explain sort of why this issue matters to you and why it bothers you so much. And so I think it's one more reason to check out that particular episode.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I cut it into 2 episodes because we talked about it for like 2 hours.
At least we don't do 2-hour podcasts anymore. As we come close to the 90-minute mark. So let me actually do that kind of transition. Sure. So we'll have more of these stories to kind of and commentaries back and forth. But just for those folks who are newly hearing about it, what is Poker and Podcasts, and what are you kind of trying to do on that? And just in general, ZenMadman video creations about these podcasts.
Yeah. So Poker and Podcasts is a series that I started a week or 2 ago, where I sit down and I play a couple tables of poker, and I listened to a podcast that Matthew and I did in the currently distant past. Well, 5 years, it's not really that distant, but over time they will become more recent. And eventually I might start listening to some other podcasts. And I might listen to some of the ones that I wasn't on as well, because I took a hiatus for a while. Mm-hmm. And and I occasionally pause it and comment on either things that every podcast I'm on, there's always like 5 different things. I'm like, I should have said this. I should have said this. And so I try to kind of add some of those things, and then also be like, oh yeah, that was a really good point. I'm glad that someone made that. And then just as often, like, well, actually, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, it's kind of fun for me. And I'm curious how people enjoy the format. Like, we've gotten a little bit of feedback, but not a ton, obviously. Still a small channel. So if people do check that out, just let me know. You can comment on YouTube, or you can @ me on Twitter, ZenMadman, or you can email Matthew at the Matthew place that we'll get in a moment. And
Matthew
just kind of let me know, like, I like this format, or like, why don't you play chess instead, or whatever, and because that's on the table. I'm interested in basically taking the old podcast episodes and turning them into videos without necessarily just having a slide that's like, this is this podcast episode, and then like playing the podcast, which is also an option. Like, we can do that too. But I just think having them available on YouTube, it's just, they're already all the places that podcasts are available except YouTube. So,
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm really glad you're doing it. It's kind of fun for me to get to listen and to hear your thoughts about it, even though sometimes I'm like, well, I can't you were misrepresenting what I said, and I can't.
That's what the comments are for.
Yeah, you'll see. Get some more people in the comments, just so I don't look like a lunatic for having like 8 comments in their
We got
videos.
1 or 2 people who've been, complimenting your sartorial choices, I will say.
Yes, which I appreciate. So thank you all for that. All right. Well, thank you all so much, Paul. Thanks as always for being a part of this. To our listeners, what do you think about this? What do you think about the Amber Heard trial? Are Paul and I both fools for not paying more attention to this? Are we paying? Should we never be talking about it on podcasts like this? What do you think? What do you think of the celebrity culture and Kevin Spacey and Joss Whedon and Kathleen Kennedy and all this? What do you think about the stuff we talked about with Poker and Podcasts? Let us know. If you go to TheEthicalPanda.com, there you'll find all the different ways to contact us, Twitter, Facebook, etc. You'll also find there all the different ways, all the other episodes of podcasting that I'm doing on this podcast, on the Star Wars Universe podcast, where we're doing a lot of coverage of Kenobi. We're going to be coming back. I'm going to be coming back soon on PandaVision, I believe it's going to be. We're going to be talking about The Boys and Umbrella Academy. I also might be doing some stuff on Ms. Marvel. Stranger Things is out. There's a new Top Gun movie out that was such a big part of my childhood when I was 8 years old that I definitely want to talk about that again. There's a lot of content happening in June. Not to mention, it's a Pride Month, and so we'll probably talk about that. Or we might talk about Queer Pride. We might talk about Queer Wrath. We'll see. Both are sort of good contenders for attention this particular year. So check out all that at theethicalpanda.com. Please go to youtube.com and ZenMadman and hit like, hit subscribe. Do what you can to support what Paul's doing there, on Twitch as well, but especially on YouTube. Check that out. Check out all the other podcasts. And most importantly, the thing I'm going to really ask you to do, whether you're on Team Amber or Team Johnny, whether you're on Team Kathleen or Team Filoni, or Team Kennedy versus Team Filoni, I was going to say Team Dave, but that didn't sound right. Whether you're on Team Matthew should do these long, drawn-out things, or Team Matthew should shut the hell up so you can get on with your day, have a nice day.
Who can we kill?
NSA agents who are listening, that was in humor.
I'll get up to the NSA episode soon enough in the Poker and Podcast.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be fun. Let us go to STI Town. We're gonna clap.
We need some new material on this one. You know what I mean?
I've come up with a different way to say it.
Okay, that's true. Okay. That's true. I haven't heard STI Town before.
There you go. All right. 3, 2, 1.
I think I heard myself.